expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the station, its staff, management, or sponsors. It's Monday night at 9 p.m. and time for Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. Dr. Ricky Siegel is a certified sex therapist, educator, and supervisor, and his brother Larry Siegel is a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator. The Siegel brothers are here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality, but we're unsure who to ask, including questions you didn't even know you had. They will also welcome guests from around the globe to talk about a wide variety of topics and issues within the fascinating world of sexuality. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Sex Talk.
Well, good evening, and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel brothers. My name is Dr. Richard Siegel. I'm a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And among other things, my super awesome big brother.
Yes, it's still the favorite thing I do.
Thank you for joining us. We're on the radio in South Florida on 95.3 FM and 1470 AM and a couple news stations I don't remember.
96.3 and 96.3 FM and 740 AM. And if you are listening to us on 1470 AM or 740 AM, please give us a call. We would love to talk to people who are still on AM radio. Right? So if you want to give us a call, you can do so.
There's the number.
Well, excellent.
That doesn't help if folks are on the radio.
That's right. If you're on the radio, can you see that?
So on the radio, folks, it's 888-565-1470. And we are streaming live on Facebook if you're joining us there. Hello.
Hello.
Thanks
Welcome.
for joining us. And
Indeed.
please help us out and hit the like and share buttons liberally and often.
Yes,
and
indeed.
thank you for joining us for our favorite night of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Though every night should be sex talk.
Indeed.
In one form or another,
Indeed.
whether it's between lovers, between parents and their kids, between strangers on a subway.
And just people within themselves. It's a little good self-talk that needs to be a part of that as well.
That, goofing aside, that's a really good point. People don't talk to themselves about sex.
Absolutely.
Unless it's, some orchestra of guilt and shame and mixed messages. And, I shouldn't be doing this. And is this normal? And am I normal? And what is normal?
So basically, narcissism and anxiety are really the only things people do talk to themselves about when it comes to sex and sexuality.
Yeah. Wow.
They either promote themselves in their own mind, have these great narcissistic fantasies, or again, like you're saying, it's the anxiety, the especially that performance anxiety. What do I look like in this position? What do they think of me? Am I pleasing them?
Isn't that odd that insecurity breeds such self-obsession? And the last thing anyone should be during sex is in their head and preoccupied.
Sure.
Right? It should be an abandon and going to a place, a metaphoric place with that person or people, whatever your thing is.
And hopefully wanting to connect to your partner as opposed to trying to retreat.
Or connecting mechanically, like, body, do your thing, and don't disappoint me while I hide in my head and hope everything goes well.
Absolutely.
Right.
And again, we've discussed a number of times this irony, how the thing that gives us the most pleasure, the most joy, the thing that brings us ecstasy is such a source of pain and discomfort and fear and anxiety for so many people.
It is, it's part of that frustration that I think fuels us, and most people in our profession, sexuality educators and sex therapists and sexologists of all stripe, it's unavoidable in the world in which we live to not feel this constant frustration.
Exactly. And with us, I think frustration and outrage is kind of our fuel.
Yeah. I didn't used to like to admit that. You've rubbed off on me.
We kind of have no choice.
I mean, there's a bumper sticker somewhere out there that says if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. Right? Because it's just so much in today's crazy upside-down world. It just gets put on steroids when we're talking about anything sexual. Even just three little letters, S-E-X, and people spin off.
No combination of letters give us more trouble.
What's about to come next? What are we talking about? People don't want to hear the word sexuality and child in the same sentence.
Absolutely.
Because they immediately panic and think, oh my God, they're talking about sexualizing children.
I still get asked to change that.
Right. No, remember, we committed on the air, and now I'm about to do it again.
Ah, that's right.
To restart since 2007, Daddy's Little Girl.
Mm-hmm.
The role of fathers in the healthy sexual development of their daughters.
Yep.
The Friday night before Father's Day, 2020.
We will do it.
Be the return of Daddy's
Absolutely.
Little Girl. And yes, we were actually asked to present that at a conference, and with much shyness and hesitation, I was asked, we're really excited about the presentation, but is there any way you would consider changing the name? And I said, why, for heaven's sake? And the answer was because some people on the committee were survivors of child sexual abuse, and to them the phrase brings up images of what,
right.
incest?
I think the phrase was "might get triggered."
No, this was before triggering was a thing.
Oh, okay. Wait, triggering or scissoring?
Triggering.
Okay.
Scissoring's always been a thing.
Yeah.
But we don't want to blow up Ken's head. You know he's listening. But honestly, that I said, no, we would rather not do the presentation if we're going to let a beautiful image like Daddy's Little Girl be the default connotation for incest of all things. Right. So we stuck to it. It was a wonderful time.
Yeah.
It was very well received. And there's a handful of other folks around the country that, unfortunately, very few that I know of, that are doing this kind of work. But I mean, how do you argue that fathers have an influence on their daughter's sexual development? How do you argue with that?
Well, you can't really.
Or the absence of a father.
Right,
has
and
an
we
effect
know
on the sexual development of
that
the
has a
daughter.
big effect. Absolutely.
Right.
But again, there's that fear. How many fathers, and this is part of why we do that, right? This sort of almost natural default state. So many fathers, particularly when their daughters hit puberty and start going through adolescence, they I mean, it's not just back off, they often run away, including stop hugging, start withholding affection. Because they're afraid. No more lap sitting, no more even touching, no even arm around the shoulder, even hug, for fear they may touch a breast, for fear they may actually feel any kind of stimulation, from hugging their daughters.
I think that puberty, obviously to everyone on the planet, is such a time of such overt sexuality. Right. I think that's the main reason why old people are so afraid of young people, because it's such a powerful energy that exudes, right? Even if young people don't know what it is and what to do with it, it's just there's no ignoring it. So little girls look like little boys, and it's easy to pretend they're asexual.
Right.
But
well, now again, they're
puberty
becoming
hits,
women, and it is a sexual thing.
They're obvious, and then the first period, oh my God, now they're a real sexual being. And a lot of dads freak out at that.
Yeah, and just the discomfort.
Just when daughters are needing them the most.
Right. That's the gross irony.
Development. Dads are backing off.
Absolutely.
Like, first period, that's your mother's department. I'm out.
Right, and that's that other part of it too. That personal discomfort, that sort of sex phobia, erotophobia that comes along with that aside. It is that sense of, well, I can't talk about that. Right? My daughter is starting her period. I can't talk about that. And we want fathers to be able to talk about that.
Course.
Men are giving this information to little girls. Women can give information to little boys. This is not a gender-typed thing. Information is gender neutral. And if we have information, we have an obligation to pass it on to children, especially when it's our children and they need this for their healthy development.
Absolutely.
Talk about abdicating parental responsibility.
That's been right at the heart of the whole sex ed debate for as long as institutional memory, since there's been such a thing, right? People fight and scream and carry on about sex ed in school, and it always comes down to, why is this even an issue? Because that's a parent's job. If parents have kids, guess what? Automatically, you adopt the title of sexuality educator.
Absolutely.
Because now if you have kids, that means part of that is raising a sexually healthy person. And whether you do that well or abdicate and either, see no evil, hear no evil,
Right.
speak no evil, or just lie. No, sex is evil. Don't touch that. You'll
Right. You're
you'll
not
go
supposed to.
hell.
You know,
Right.
you don't need to know it until you get married.
Right.
Okay. Now, you know.
What? Go ahead.
Right. I was going to say, to go back to what you were just saying here again
Yeah.
about the parents that do get into this thing about it's a parent's responsibility. It shouldn't be taught in schools. Then I'm going to say something to you parents who may think that way. If you do think that way, if that is a belief system of yours, I will support you, but I want to see you out there advocating for good sex ed. I want to see you learning what you need to learn, and I want to see you actually talking to your kids. If you
Yeah.
believe that it should be the school's responsibility, because we know there are a lot of parents that believe they don't have to do it, it should be the schools. And I want to see you out in front of the school district office. I want to see you advocating for good sex ed curricula. I want to see you advocating for people
there
who
you go.
know what they're doing, who are actually going to teach kids good information, medically
Teaching,
accurate,
right.
developmentally appropriate.
Teaching, not preaching. You can save that
Exactly.
stuff for the weekend.
Exactly.
Like your
So
chosen house of
we
worship.
can't keep going with this. Well, the parents think it's the schools think it's the parents, and while they're fighting over who can avoid the issue more, nothing is getting done.
Who and or what are educating our kids about sexuality?
Well, the reality of it is basically Twitter and porn.
Yeah, and maybe the handful that are still watching MTV, maybe, you know,
Which
the
certainly
teen-
doesn't make
the
me feel
teen mom
comfortable.
shows or
Yeah.
the, you know,
Exactly.
that
Right.
stuff. Yeah,
Right.
oh, that's a great source of information.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we've talked about this before, and this really speaks to the parents, you know, and especially if you do have an issue with the ubiquity of porn and just sexually graphic material, regardless of the context. If you do have an issue with that, if you don't like the fact that that's what's teaching your kids about sex, then do something. Be the educative parent.
This guy. Yeah.
No, I'm
It's-
sorry. I really am getting a little tired of all this controversy when it shouldn't be controversy.
Right.
You know, when I look up just to see, even just for the show, you know, what can we talk about that is controversial? Like we need to go
Really?
look outside for controversy.
Sex.
It blows my
Dot,
mind
dot.
how many times sex ed and birth control are at the top of the list
Right.
of sexual controversies.
Right.
And it just shouldn't be. There's really no reason for that. It is irrational. It is ignorant. And we are just digging a bigger hole for ourselves. Right? And it's the kids that are going to be suffering. Well, not completely, because we're going to suffer too, because we're going to be having to pick up a lot of those pieces.
Sure. I'm sure a lot of Gen Xers did not expect to be raising their grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
And consequences, again, you really have to stick your head pretty deep in the sand to not see the consequences of poor sexual health. We live them.
Well,
and it's embarrassing
continue on that
to compare us
picture.
to other countries in the world
Right.
where it's just so commonsensical
Right.
and normal and duh.
Exactly.
Right.
And let's remind people, going back to that imagery,
Yeah.
the deeper you stick your head in the sand, please visualize what part of your body is now sticking up in the air,
The most
exposed and open,
vulnerable.
and
for a
cannot do
good
anything to
kick.
protect it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
So
yes.
if you need an image to guide yourself, there you go.
So I was going to say thank you for doing a wonderful job. I was away last week visiting with my beautiful daughter. And I wanted to touch back, this is a good start, to your conversation with the wonderful Deb Grayson.
Yes,
So
yes. And
great
thank you
to-
again for doing
Thanks,
the show, Deb.
You're the best. But when all of these issues are focused on families dealing with kids expressing either orientation or gender identities that maybe did not fit the parents' fantasy of what their kids were going to be,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like kids identifying as transgender or as gay or lesbian, and that, I think, sexualizes what everybody's working so hard to keep asexual childhood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we don't want
Another nice
they're
irony.
They're just asexual until puberty, and then we'll just, I don't know, we'll go crazy until they're 18, and then be done with it.
Then send them off to college, and then you
Right.
don't have to worry about them.
Yeah, then they'll, again, unfortunately, too often learn the hard way.
Yeah.
But because it's sexual identity and sexual orientation, that starts the spinning clown show all over again. And as you were discussing last week, there still remains, just like so many other areas of sexuality, things remain controversial that should not be controversial.
Right. Now, can I make a slight little adjustment into what you're describing? Because, I mean, we do, there's a slightly different context. If we talk about sexual identity, there's also really, especially more with kids, it's really more the gender
Excellent.
identity.
Good call. Right. Yeah, because everybody has a sexual identity as a sexual human being.
Mm-hmm.
Gender is a part of that. Good.
Right.
Correct. And yeah, what does a 3-year-old know from sex and intercourse and penises and vaginas? But they know what they feel.
Right.
And they know if they
Right.
feel like something isn't right
Mm-hmm.
and shouldn't be dismissed
Right.
or punished for expressing a feeling.
And I want to emphasize something that I said last week when we were talking with Deb, that if you have a 3 or a 5-year-old who you see or has been assigned that gender of girl, yet she now starts talking about, I really feel like a boy.
Right.
I think especially at that age, and we've had a conversation similar to this before as well, that especially at that age, it is not a question. It's not, am I? Right. This is a statement, I am. And we have to listen to that.
Right.
And we have to support that. Right? Because it's not even a question. Right? They're going to be very matter of fact, very flat out, I am a boy. Even though everybody may be treating her like a girl, what she is saying is, this doesn't fit.
Right.
This is not me. And there's really no question about that. There's really no, I wonder if, maybe I am. No, that's pretty definitive at that point. Right?
But I mean, I get, just to play devil's advocate, I get the response that a lot of parents and a lot of adults and even a lot of professionals say, you're 3, what do you know?
Right.
Well,
go back to kind of what you just said.
Wait.
They know what they feel.
Right, they certainly do.
Right? And that's what we have to go by.
They know when their feelings are discounted or shot down or told that they're wrong, which is really what sticks and lasts a lifetime. Right?
So that brings us to this idea of, if you do have a young child who does express this sort of lack of synchronicity, I mean, she understands, or he will understand, that they have a body, but they also understand that the way they feel doesn't match that body. It doesn't match what people are expecting them to do in that body.
The 4 and 5-year-old kids are old enough to understand concepts like boy brain, girl body, or girl brain, boy body, as can happen sometimes, even though most people have a boy brain and a boy body, or a girl brain and a girl body.
Right.
That's not so complicated that a 4-year-old can't understand it.
Exactly.
And accept.
Exactly. So I think the real question is not about the merits of their expressing themselves in that way. I think the real question is, what do we do? How do we respond to that? How do we deal with that? And this is sort of a controversy within several fields. It's a controversy within pediatrics.
Even
it's
in
a
the very
controversy
small
within
sex therapy field.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's a controversy in development and psychology. So it's one of those things where, what do you do? Now, we know that there are there's some people in these camps that will say, once a child does express that, then you need to start hormones. In fact, there's, I think it was the American Academy of Pediatrics that, before they were so quick to go into the hormones, were also saying you need to do the genital reconstruction very early, within the first year.
I wonder why that's controversial.
Yeah, okay. Now, I have to say that, and this I think was lost in the literature. I did not find anything in any of those descriptions where people are talking about that, doing that reconstruction surgery, that had anything to do with an expressed identity. That was more for an intersex condition, I think,
Right.
for what we call ambiguous genitals.
Yes.
Sometimes a baby is born and you can't really tell what their genitals are.
Right.
Is this a giant clitoris or a very, very small penis?
Right.
Is
this
this
a vagina or a scrotum that didn't close up?
Exactly.
Right.
And we know that for many, many years, it's the sort of the physician who's there makes the choice, makes the decision,
Point and look.
does a little nip and tuck and say, okay, there you go.
Right.
It's kind of amazing how often they have been right.
But that's really a different thing.
Exactly.
And people have to understand intersex conditions are almost always chromosomal or hormonal in terms of like fetal development. It's not a gender identity. It may influence one's gender identity, but it's really a separate thing.
Right.
It's a person's body. You know, if XX is typically female and XY is typically male, what's the gender of someone who's born with an XXY? You know, of course, people are cruel and say things like he, she, or it, or freak, but you know, it's a human being with a sexual development anomaly or atypical.
And again, atypical, just means it's not the norm. But I think we also have to evolve to the point where we can see that this is part of the vast diversity of humanity. Right? Again, I'm always struck by the irony that we can easily acknowledge how many different types of grasses. We can acknowledge 749 different species of mosquito. But the most complex and complicated organism on the planet, there can only be one?
One or
two if you count gender twice.
Right. Yeah.
So it really is kind of insane.
Yeah.
So, if we have a child expressing this kind of atypical identity, what are the various positions that people take on that?
Well, I mean, I think most, after all the activists and advocates and everyone is, kind of fighting, most zero in on this idea of watchful waiting and slow, gentle kind of social transition first. Like maybe the kid can dress in the gender they identify with at home, or maybe, kind of stepwise finish elementary school and then maybe in middle school, whatever they negotiate as a family with, hopefully with their helpers and counselors and medical and mental health providers.
So what you're basically saying, this watchful waiting, it's not necessarily doing nothing, but it does involve allowing that child to live and express themselves the way they're comfortable.
Yeah.
But it's not about medical treatments. We're not talking about hormones yet. We're not talking about surgery.
It's not just rushing to, okay, they said it, so we take it as a fact and run.
Okay. Oh, Johnny, you really think you're a girl? Okay, put on a dress.
But, puberty blocking hormones is not a little thing.
Well,
right? And I've heard people talking casually about it. So if they change their mind by the time they get to high school, they'll stop the hormones and they'll be fine. Can we really say that?
But that is kind of the third position. Right? That is the third position. That I think that watchful waiting will let them grow into who they are.
What I like about the idea of puberty blockers is certain things, it's easier to masculinize someone who was born female with testosterone than it is to feminize a post-pubertal natal male. Right, because once the voice changes and the bones get longer and
that's not really reversing.
It's really hard to reverse, right? So, the idea of postponing puberty until the kid is of an age closer to maybe 10, 11, 12, where they can have more agency to make decisions that are affecting their lives instead of parents having to make the decision for a 6-year-old.
Right, and there's that word again, agency. Letting them have the control.
It's their life, their body.
Absolutely. So
a lot of new therapists are terrified of getting their first transgender case where the first time they're going to be asked to write a letter to send the patient to an endocrinologist to start hormone therapy. And they're afraid that so much pressure. What if I'm wrong? And what are the rule outs? Especially with adults. I'm sure you've had a similar experience to mine. Almost 99 out of 100 times, You just know in the first minute of a conversation, I'm talking to a man or I'm talking to a woman.
Right.
I don't care what their birth certificate says, right? But teenagers, we've talked about this too. You know, teenagers sometimes, especially millennial teens, it was a time when, you know, it was kind of trendy to be bi and college campuses. So could there be some mistakes? Could a kid say that they're trans in 7th grade and then decide, no, I'm really, or bisexual, and then decide later they're trans?
And yes, it's possible, but the controversial third position is it's not that big of a deal, according to some, to change the hormonal pattern that you started them on, even if you did. Above anything else, regardless of where somebody is, if your kid talks to you, listen, support them.
And if you're
That's
not
the most
sure
important thing.
Where to go, get help. Call one of us. Call somebody. Go online. There's endless resources and no excuses any longer.
Believe your kids, support them, and love them.
That's our time.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll be back here on Friday at 7, not Mondays at 9 for more Sex Talk.
We'll
with
get
the
that
Siegel
changed
brothers.
one of these days. Have a great night.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us every Monday night at 9 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of the station, its staff.